I still remember the briefing as if it were yesterday, and perhaps that is the cruelest irony of all. For me, it truly was yesterday. For Earth. I don't even know how to name it. Too far gone to be called the past. The mission had a technical name, cold and without poetry, Lazarus Event. The objective was simple in theory and impossible in practice: bring a crude spacecraft close enough to a black hole to steady it without being torn apart, yet near enough to measure, in real time, the boundary where time stops being a promise and becomes a prison. The media sold it as heroism. Government sold it as necessity. And science admitted, in a low voice, that there was no way to simulate this in a laboratory. If we wanted to understand what the universe hides at the heart of gravity, we would have to place flesh and consciousness where even clocks give up. I was responsible for records and system redundancies. In other words, I was the kind of person who believes the world doesn't end if you have enough data. I believed that before seeing a black hole up close. The black hole orbited a dead star, and an isolated system chosen for a reason no one admitted publicly. It was clean. Not too much dust, not too much interference, not too many variables. A perfect monster to be studied as if it were an experiment. The plan was short. Brutally short. We would enter the region of maximum time dilation for 3 hours, from our perspective. 3 hours of measurements, scans, gravitational readings, and data collection. Then an emergency burn would pull us out like a fish yanked from an abyss. 3 hours. The committee that approved the mission repeated that number as if it were a prayer. 3 hours sounded small enough to calm public opinion, small enough to reduce risk, small enough to seem reasonable. But no one spoke clearly about the cost. Even with all the math, there was a margin of uncertainty. A gap between what calculations predicted and what the universe would allow. Time dilation would be extreme, that much we knew. Exactly how extreme was the kind of question you only answer once you're already inside the answer. The night before launch, I called my sister. She had a young daughter. My niece, Leah, was 4 years old and believed astronauts were people who go play with stars. My sister didn't want to talk much. When people wanted to joke, they said the mission was a one-way trip. When they wanted to be honest, they just said, "Good luck." I promised I would come back. I promised in this human way, the way that doesn't calculate gravity or futures, with faith. The launch was clean. The jump was clean. The silence of space swallowed us as it always does. For weeks, the journey was a ritual of maintenance, checks, routine, and a growing anxiety, like the sound of a drum you feel in your body before you hear it. Until one day, it appeared at the window. A black hole is not a black sphere like in old textbooks. It is an absence with an edge. A cut in reality. Around it, light bends and stretches as if being pulled by a hunter without a mouth. There was a glowing disk spinning, shredded, incandescent matter rotating too fast, screaming in silence. And behind it, distorted stars. A sky shattered like glass. In that moment, I understood we were looking at a place where rules are not broken. They are rewritten. The ship began to tremble as we approached, not from physical turbulence, but from stress in the very systems of reference. Our instruments disagreed. Time, mass, distance, everything began to argue, as if each sensor were living in a different universe. When we crossed the planned entry point, the onboard clock marked the beginning of the 3 hours. And the first thing we felt was not fear. It was slowness. Not the slowness of the body, but the sensation that the outside world had accelerated while we were trapped inside a drop of time. Messages from Earth began arriving faster than they should. Data packets colliding with one another. And then, silence. As if the channel had been compressed until there was no room left for the human voice. The commander tried to stabilize the link. The engineer tried to recalibrate. I tried to record everything. That was when the main screen displayed an alert that wasn't in the protocol. It wasn't a system failure. It was a prediction updating in real time. Estimated dilation. 1 hour on board equals 17 years on Earth. No one spoke for several seconds. Because, in that moment, math had become a sentence. 3 hours. 51 years. I thought of my sister. I thought of Leah. I thought of the ridiculous promise I had made to return. And the black hole, outside, remained there, quiet, as if it were in no hurry at all. It had all the time in the universe. We didn't. After the number appeared on the screen, silence stopped being merely the absence of sound. It became a presence. Something heavy, filling every centimeter of the ship, as if even the air had understood what that equation meant. 3 hours dead. 51 years. No one needed to say it out loud, but we all made the same additional calculation, the one that wasn't in the reports. What if it wasn't exactly 3 hours? What if time that didn't obey even the most pessimistic estimates? The commander was the first to move. Not out of courage, but out of habit. Some people only keep existing because they know what to do when everything loses meaning. We continue the mission, he said, his voice far too steady to be natural. Every piece of data we collect must justify this cost. Cost that. The word echoed inside me like an insult. I stared at the external display and felt something strange, almost physical, the impression that the black hole was watching us. Not as a conscious being, but as a phenomenon that doesn't need to look in order to dominate. It simply exists, and everything around it must negotiate its own reality. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. In that place, the difference was already losing relevance. The sensors recorded values that looked like typing errors, particles appearing where they shouldn't exist, signals repeating before they were even emitted, gravitational echoes that felt like answers to questions we hadn't asked yet. At one point, I noticed something deeply disturbing in the internal temporal logs. Our clocks were synchronized with each other, but not with the rest of the universe. It was as if we had been cut out of the normal flow of time and pasted onto its margin. We weren't traveling through time. Time had traveled on without us. We tried to re-establish communication with Earth. The system was still receiving signals, but they came wrong. Fragmented. Some sounded like automated messages, looping like ancient echoes. Others carried timestamps that made no sense. One transmission arrived intact enough to be decoded. It was a routine bulletin. An administrative report. No mention of emergency, no talk of rescue. Just cold numbers, as if our mission had been archived decades ago. And maybe it had. That was the moment something inside me broke, not dramatically, but silently, like a crack you only notice once water starts to seep through. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of returning. Because if 50 years had passed in 3 hours, who would be there to receive us? What kind of world would still use our languages, our references, our names? My sister would have grown old. Liao would no longer be a child. If they were still alive. Science speaks very little about anticipatory grief, the suffering of losing people who still breathe, but no longer belong to the same time as you. When the timer reached the midpoint of the planned window, we began preparations for the extraction maneuver. It was a delicate process, almost surgical. One minimal error, and the ship could be trapped in an impossible orbit, condemned to age while the universe died outside. The burn began. And then, the black hole reacted. Not with violence, but with indifference. The gravitational fields oscillated. Space ahead of us seemed to stretch, as if we were trying to cross something viscous. Systems screamed overlapping alerts. For a moment, I had the unmistakable sensation that the ship was being stretched in time, not in space. That was when I saw something I never included in the official report. On the display, for a fraction of a second I cannot measure, the accretion disk seemed to slow down. As if the chaos around the black hole had paused just for us. And in that impossible interval, I felt, not saw, felt, that this place was not merely a physical trap. It was a boundary. As if the universe had limits not only of space, but of experience. And we had crossed them without permission. The final thrust came with a brutal jolt. The stars ahead rearranged themselves. The sky stopped looking shattered. Silence returned to normal, or to what we once called normal. Alarms ceased one by one, like exhausted voices giving up on screaming. We were out. The onboard clock marked 2 hours and 56 minutes since entry. 4 minutes less than planned. No one celebrated. Because we all knew that, for Earth, it could mean years more. The commander immediately ordered a course correction toward home. Earth still appeared on the stellar maps. It still existed. It still had coordinates. But existence is not the same as familiarity. As the ship accelerated for the return jump, I stared at the communications panel, waiting for some new signal, some voice, anything that would say, "You still belong to this time." Nothing came. And for the first time since leaving the planet, I wondered whether returning truly meant going back, or merely visiting the ruins of everything I once was. The first thing we noticed upon entering the solar system was the silence. Not the ordinary silence of space, the technical emptiness we were already used to, but a different kind of silence, dense and uncomfortable, as if we were arriving at a place where something important had ended a long time ago. The sensors detected signals. Many signals. Old satellites still orbited. Automated platforms continued to operate. But there was one impossible detail to ignore: the patterns didn't match anything we knew. The frequencies were different. The technological signatures were unfamiliar. Humanity had moved on, without us. Earth appeared on the main display a few minutes later. Still blue. Still beautiful. Still alive. But different. The masses of nighttime light no longer corresponded to the cities I remembered. Regions that once glowed were dark. Others, once dark, now pulsed with artificial intensity. Urban geography had been redesigned. The planet seemed to have the same body, but a different soul. We attempted contact. This time, a response came. Not a human voice, but a system. An automated intelligence that introduced itself with a name none of us recognized. It confirmed our identities within seconds. Our genetic signatures were still present in the historical archives. Historical. The word fell on us like a verdict. We were classified as Horizon Mission Crew, status, temporal returnees. The system informed us of the current date. 127 years had passed. Not 50. Not 60. 127 years. The commander said nothing. He simply sat down slowly, as if his body had finally been given permission to feel the weight his mind had been avoiding since the beginning. I did the math in silence. My sister no longer existed. Leon no longer existed. No one I loved was still breathing in this world. We requested permission to land. The response was immediate and disturbingly polite. We were instructed to dock at an orbital station before any contact with the surface. Historical preservation protocols, according to the system. Historical. When the airlock opened, we did not find crowds, soldiers, or curious onlookers. Only a few humans, if they could still be called that. Their bodies were subtle, adapted, almost fragile. Visible implants. Eyes with artificial reflections. Movements too precise. They looked at us as if we were something between a relic and a statistical error. We were taken to a white, silent room, where they explained what had happened. Our mission had become a milestone. The definitive proof of extreme time dilation. The event that redefined humanity's relationship with deep space. After us, they never again attempted anything similar with human crews. Exploration continued through probes, artificial intelligences, digital consciousness. Flesh was too fragile for time. We were the last humans to cross that boundary, and the first to pay the full price. The world we helped shape with our data no longer had a place for us. There was no hatred in this. No cruelty. Only logic. We were given an offer. We could remain alive, with advanced medical assistance, and an isolated colony. We would be studied, preserved, perhaps even celebrated as symbols of an ancient era. But we would never again take part in active history. We would be walking past. That night, if it was still night, I walked alone to an observation deck on the station. I looked at Earth slowly turning, indifferent to my existence. And then I understood the truth no one dared to say out loud. We didn't return too late. We returned to a place that no longer needed us. The black hole didn't kill us. Time did something worse. It moved on. And we were left behind. Today, as I record this final account, I know our mission achieved its objective. Humanity survived, evolved, found new ways to exist. But I also know there is a price that will never appear in scientific reports. The price of discovering that the universe doesn't need witnesses. That time does not wait. And that some journeys, even when they have a return, no longer lead home. We crossed the abyss. And the abyss returned the favor, not by devouring us, but by making us strangers to everything we once called life.